On Election Day, the new National Security Advisor, retired General Michael Flynn, wrote an op-ed in which he argued that the United States should extradite a guy who Turkey wants us to extradite. And it now appears that General Flynn's company was being paid by the Turkish government. And he did not disclose that in the op-ed. He did not disclose that publicly when he was announced as an advisor to the campaign. He has never talked about it publicly in terms of being National Security Advisor. I mean, I don't have anything against General Flynn personally, but he was being paid by a foreign government and advocating their policy positions in the U.S. government while advising your candidate, now the president-elect.
I heard you say it appears. Is that...
Well, he's never, I mean, it's been reported that he was on the his company was receiving money from the government of Turkey, and somebody who works in his company has confirmed that.
I have not discussed that with him, so I would not be the right person to ask to comment on that.
If he was on the payroll of a foreign government while advising your candidate, would that be disqualifying for him as National Security Advisor? Not
necessarily. I would really need to know the facts, and obviously that decision only lies with one person, the president-elect.
General Flynn, during the campaign, accused Hillary Clinton of being involved in sex crimes against children.
You're talking about a tweet?
Yeah, he wrote this. It wasn't a retweet.
Or fake news?
He wrote a tweet.
Believe, right? Is that the fake news story?
I mean, he accused, during the campaign, late in the campaign, said that Hillary Clinton was involved in sex crimes with children.
But I think the source of that was a fake news report.
Right, but he tweeted it, right? He broadcast this.
I haven't seen his Twitter feed, but I trust you.
Okay, he did. You can ask him. He did. As National Security Advisor, it will be his judgment that the president turns to in times of national security crises, no matter what they are. His judgment is such that he did publicly accuse Hillary Clinton of being a child rapist.
Well, no.
Why?
No.
He did.
That's a little hyperbolic.
Well, sex crimes against children, we can...
I don't like these fake news retweets myself.
It wasn't a retweet. He said that everybody needed to check out this news that Hillary Clinton was involved with sex crimes with children.
Rachel.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So if that's his judgment, I can understand how he might be involved at some level in the campaign. He might have things to offer. Why would a person with judgment like that be National Security Advisor? Wouldn't you want somebody who had rock-solid instincts and judgment, particularly about public information, to be in that kind of a key role?
But you're conflating the two things. You're saying that you're telling your audience, frankly, one negative thing about him, and we're not looking at his overall credentials and his years in the national security community, his tours of duty. I've talked to him about those directly. His tours of duty, the 3 goals he has for the country as National Security Advisor, which include government reform and peace through strength, but a stabilization of the Middle East. You know, these are his goals, and he's got a full, long resume of very impressive national security skills and accomplishments that I just can't wash away based on, a tweet. And the other thing I just want to say,
like, if you're a driver and you've run down somebody in a crosswalk, there's no defense to that to say, look at all the other days I had such a good driving record. You know what I'm saying?
It's not a perfect analogy.
No, it's not a perfect analogy. But comment on the judgment that it takes to have said something like that and never apologized for it.
And if I may, I would like to comment on the judgment of what we currently have. In other words, my heart breaks every single day when I look at Aleppo. Why? Well, because I'm a compassionate human being. I can't stand the fact, Rachel, that women are choosing suicide over rape. I can't stand the fact that you've got basically a plurality, if not a majority, of children under the age of 12 or 14 or so gone now, either displaced or dead and killed. And I look at that as a humanitarian crisis. And we've done next to nothing of value for 5.5 years. Where is the judgment of our Secretary of State? Where is the judgment of the administration? I mean, we can't just look the other way when things like this happen. And that is not me changing the subject. That is me saying, if we talk about judgment, let's look at what a lack of judgment, a lack of action has wrought in some hot spots around the world, beginning with Aleppo.
And in a complicated and dangerous world, I think that it's reasonable, and I don't think it's I think it's almost inarguable that there's at least question, if not concern, that we've got a president who's got no governing experience, no foreign policy experience, no public service experience. And that's, it's an unprecedented thing, but obviously he put that case to the American people, and the American people elected him. And so it's settled, but now
he's a big asset to them. And, President Obama had been in the United States Senate for practically a hot minute before he announced he would run for president. He had been a state senator, but I think people liked that too. They liked the fact that they had somebody in 2008 and again in 2009 2016 who arguably can look them in the eye, especially given who their opponents were, and say, I will go to Washington as your president owing nobody anything, and I will work for you. And it was a compelling argument for President Obama in 2008. It was a compelling argument for Donald Trump in 2016.
On national security issues, you've got President-elect Trump, though, without any national security or foreign policy or governing experience. You've also got a Secretary of State who only has private sector experience, no public service, no governing, no diplomacy experience. You've got a national security advisor who I've raised some of the questions that I have about his judgment, notwithstanding the other impressive things about his career, but there's some things that stick out like a really big red flag in terms of him. And in terms of the other policy, personnel decisions that have been announced, I mean, Monica Crowley is somebody who I like very much from the cable news world. I've met her, you know, in green rooms like this and studios like this. Monica Crowley's just been announced as a Deputy National Security Advisor, possibly a spokesperson for the National Security Council.
She has a PhD in that field.
She also has claimed publicly that Barack Obama, President Obama, is secretly not black. Barack Obama is not black, yet this guy is campaigning as black and painting anybody who dares criticize him as racist. I mean, that is the biggest con I've ever seen. It's one thing to talk like that in, you know, dummy cable news, this environment, or on talk radio, which is where she made those remarks. But how could you put somebody who has a record of saying things like that as potentially the spokesperson or the deputy at the National Security Council? Why aren't there more serious people being picked for these very critical roles on the most serious issue of all, which is national security?
I've never heard that comment. I don't even know what it means, frankly. I heard you say it.
It's amazing.
I don't know what it means, but I know Monica, and she's incredibly smart and incredibly thoughtful and deliberative in her work. And you're right. People say things on cable TV and on talk radio sometimes that I guess they would take back. That probably applies to everyone.
She's never taken this back. At the same time, you guys have just given her an incredibly important national security
job. At the same time, she has a PhD. She worked with President Nixon on a number of things, and the president-elect has faith in her to be somebody who can effectively communicate what the National Security Council, the National Security Agency is doing at a very fraught time. And I do think you're cherry-picking some appointments in that we've even been lauded by some of his naysayers and detractors as having put together, he's put together an amazing cabinet of very qualified men and women, people who have done great things in the private and public sector and who are willing to share those experiences in the cabinet. And I would just say, you know, 8 years ago at this time, I don't know about other people, but weren't critical of the cabinet that was in formation, because you want the new president, whoever the occupant is, to be able to take his time, maybe one day her time, to form that cabinet in a way that will help to execute on their agenda, on their vision for the world and for the nation's economy. And those who at least are giving the president president-elect, the wide berth and the deep breath to do that, I think we'll be very impressed with who he's put there in some of these different positions.
Kellyanne Conway, stay right there.
Okay.
You can't leave.
You got it.
Kellyanne Conway, soon to be counselor to the president, first ever Republican female campaign manager and the first woman to ever win a presidential campaign. She's here tonight for the interview.